Follows is a 2+ hour interview with Oleksa Lozowchuk, who has worked on games like the Dead Rising series, Horizon, Outer Worlds 2 most recently, but also runs his own company, Interleave. This is a team of 30 individuals. They're musicians, they're audio engineers, they're different people within the audio spectrum who go out and not only assist companies from the ground up, but also come in when that initial company just doesn't have the manpower or resources to create the amount of music or the amount of sound that they need for a video game. I've always loved having him on this podcast. One of the reasons is because he is so technical, but can describe in layman terms that I can understand, the exact ways in which he wants to put something down on a track and how he does so. He talks in this discussion about diegetic music, non-diegetic music, timing, key, chord, everything. It's all in here. It is a wide spanning podcast, and I want to thank you for listening. And as always, thank him for showing up. Let's talk about games.
For me, ever since I can remember, even when I was younger, I remember actually in high school, it was the first time I had ever, I was producing a folk pop album for my cousin who's an actress. And it was the first time I got to be like in a studio with a, 24 2-inch track, reel to reel.
Oh, damn.
This was kind of like, heaven for me, because it was just like kid in a candy store or whatever. And I could literally go days without eating, and people had to remind me, like, Oleksa, you need to eat. But you get so energized by what you're doing, how you're creating in the flow, that you literally forget to eat. My wife often will be like, she's amazing. She'll know if I'm like in a heavy writing mode, and she'll come and bring down food for me. But I'll go like 6 hours and I open the door and I'm like, oh, there's a smoothie from this morning when I forgot to, like, she was kind enough to make me a smoothie, but I didn't even have a chance to drink it, because I don't know, it's one of you do lose track of time when you're in kind of this creative space. Some things happen instantaneously where it's like you get to your goal very quickly, right? And it's almost like there's clarity in that really quick sliver of time. And then there's other times where you are just so engaged, and you're not even thinking about who you're making it for, but you are enjoying the process so much that you lose track of time. And it's literally a whole day can go by and you're like, you lose, you didn't eat, you haven't gone out to stretch, you have no perspective where you are, but you feel kind of full and satiated from that experience. So yeah, I find it just, it's not that I don't enjoy the other times that are more structured, or more like if there's meetings that are important, or if there's like, things that are important to do or that are exciting, but there is something about kind of being all in and almost like shutting everything in the periphery off, where you're like so focused on what you're doing. I find it very invigorating personally, but it depends. Like I had last year, literally just a little bit over a year ago, I was at Game SoundCon, and I was kind of the final keynote speaker, moderating with Austin and Will, Roger and Anita. We were doing a whole thing on kind of collaboration with amongst composers and with working with each other. And this is tying back to the kind of the managing energy and your flow in terms of what you can handle, what you can't. And I had a day or 2 days prior, when I flew down to LA, I started getting this crazy pain behind my ear, and literally within like 12 hours, my whole face shut down from the top here to the bottom.
Like a temporary Bell's palsy kind of thing?
Well, it was Bell's palsy, I realized, and I'm still recovering. Like, I'm much better, but I literally that night I had to do the moderating that panel, and I had to tell people I had like a bad Botox job, because like I thought I was having a stroke and stuff, but literally it shut down and I couldn't control, and this whole face was drooping. And so on one hand, in the moment when I was there, like I love improvising, moderating, feeding off of each other's energy, and like literally kind of like creatively catalyzing discussions, talking about things, going on tangents. Like I love doing that kind of thing. I feed off of it personally. But then I had encountered with the Bell's palsy like a physical limit, where it was like, in fact, the more that I stayed up later, because typically we'll stay up at these conferences with fellow composers or audio people, and we'll stay up really late, we'll hang out, we'll do whatever. And it was this last year has been a really interesting challenge for me, because I can't sustain that anymore, because what happens is the physiological symptoms start coming, and it's like, if I don't sleep if I push myself too hard, it's like my face starts drooping or whatever.
Hmm.
So it's been an interesting journey to kind of learn how to temper energy. If I got these bursts of energy, then I'll do it, but I won't do the 18 hours straight
Right.
that I used to do because my body just can't handle anymore. And now with this, I'm like, it's super obvious, like when I can't handle it, because like the next day people are like, "What's wrong with you?" You know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
When the thing about, obviously everything's a young man's game when you think about it, or at least
sure.
a lot of things are a young man's game. But talking about working a ton when you're in the energetic mode, as you've
Mm.
gotten older, has there been any a specific like tactic that you've maybe learned over the years that you sort of wish you knew when you were 20? That, I mean, just like something, some efficiency, because I'm always asked about efficiency and time. Like, oh,
Mhm.
you do this for so long. How do you have time for blank? And usually it's an efficiency. I'll find some efficiency that I don't tell people about. I'll be like, oh, this is sort of magical. This is something I can do. Has there been anything that's popped up over the years that you're like, hey, you know what? I think this is like a huge efficiency for me, or this is something that's helped me, and I wish I knew it when I was younger.
That's a really good question. I think there's multiple levels to answering it. One, I think I've learned, I read this book my brother-in-law gave me called It's Who, Not How.
Hmm.
And the basic premise was, if you have big ambitions of what you want to achieve or whatever it is, sometimes the quickest path to it is actually who you know and not literally knowing every single step along the
Right.
way of how to get there, because there's people who have done it, they've gone through it, they know those efficiencies you're talking about, and literally sometimes a small conversation with somebody will literally save you, hundreds of
Hours.
hours, tens of
Yes.
hours, whatever it is, right? And so I've kind of embraced the power of making sure I have a team of people around me that I trust. In fact, this fall, one thing that really dawned on me was like, I'm 49, and I'm like, I still got tons to learn, and so I actively have been pursuing mentors in different areas of my life. To the point of like, these are people who are seasoned, who have these experiences, who have hacks basically of how to like, you know, make the most of each moment. And I've kind of pursued that specifically as a way of kind of dialing in and right sizing my energy, but also my output, so that it used to be like, oh, I want to be as prolific as possible and output as much as I can. And I find as I've been getting older, we're empty nesters. My three kids are gone now to university, and it's like it's a different stage of life now where it's less about like I got to do everything and anything. It's more about like the things that are uniquely me and the things that uniquely speak to my voice and what I'm interested in. They're kind of like I can put them on, all the fingers, all my fingers and my thumbs. I could probably count like the core big things that I want to do.
Hmm.
And I'm like, I don't need to be some new up and coming amazing young composer. I don't need to be a John Williams. I don't need to like I'm uniquely me. And so what I've been finding is the more that I lean into actually what I'm really uniquely good at and try to bring a team along me to support me in those ambitions, whether that's through our company Interleave, or through, other experts that I bring in to help with projects, I found that just by not trying to be someone else and trying to kind of deal with FOMO or trying to worry that you're going to be
Sure.
like, you're not the most efficient person in the world. That's kind of a waste of time. I find the better thing is like, what is at the core of who I want to be in the next 30, 40 years? And if I'm looking at like the most important legacy things for me of like, bodies of work that I produce or building a company or having relationships with my family or other people, those are the things that I do. And then I kind of like make sure in the morning when I journal or whatnot, I'm always coming back to those core issues so that I'm not like being pulled away to things that are essentially interesting. They're definitely interesting, and they might even be invigorating. But at the end of the day, everything has a cost, and there's only so much time that you have. So
Hmm.
I found that Subtraction was one of the most efficient hacks for me personally. And we do that in audio and music, like whether you're looking at like a piece that you've orchestrated for orchestra or whatnot. A lot of times it's funny, like people always think that there's such esoteric knowledge in music that you have to, like you were talking before about like,
the drumming,
drumming and whatnot.
Right.
And yes, there's a certain level of that, but at the end of the day, I kind of feel like there's always a through line between all that. Like I can learn from an electrician or a plumber or somebody else something that I can apply to my own domain and vice versa. And then in music, particularly dealing with the orchestra or even mixing big complex pieces, usually your best tool is mute, like literally mute and delete. Just be ruthless. Just start muting parts, start reducing, simplifying to the bare essentials. And then the bare essentials are kind of, they literally allow things to like have space to breathe. So if you're dealing with a musician in a space or a group of musicians in a space, often like musicians playing a single note all in unison together or a chord or something, but having some kind of movement can generate a lot of energy in a physical space, which is very impactful. Whereas if every single person was doing some other complex line, that was kind of, there's room for that, but you kind of have to know the value of simplifying things to unlock and unleash energy. It's the same thing for like a speaker. Often like people who are in like electronic music or things where there's a lot of low end, and you literally like you go to a red light and you have a car, and you can feel the car by you pushing and stuff. That principle is like the only way the speaker can literally physically affect you and literally push out in is if you've decluttered the low end, so you don't have competing bass and a kick drum and all these kind of elements that are fighting each other. And it's the same principle. You're literally carving out space and making a choice of what is in the foreground and what is in the background, or what's essential and what is not essential. So I think, that's a long way of answering your question, but I think that one of the biggest hacks is just as I get older, it's just, I don't need to be all things to all people. I need to lean into what is uniquely me. And I try to just focus on what is the quickest way to have momentum to the exclusion of everything else that can easily pull me away. And kind of detour, basically hack me and rob me of my energy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. It's weird you mentioned that, because the bell curve of, I think, of effort and popularity is pretty much matched what you were talking about, where you sort of become known, you're doing a bunch of stuff, and then at some point you're like, well, it's not a bell curve at this point. Now it's just, it's a plateau, which is pretty rough. You either go up, you go down, or you burn out. And like you said, subtraction, removing some stuff, sort of adjusting things so that maybe you're not asked to do a ton of stuff or the brand new thing, but you're getting your own. I think people have a tendency in your job, in anybody's job, when you get that first hit of popularity, or you hit and people are asking you to compose something or asking you to do something, you do want to do it all because it's also fresh. And then after a while, that freshness, it can either go away or, and this is great for people where, luckily we talked about this prior to the podcast starting, but if that freshness stays there with you, you can section it off and still get your personal life in and stuff like that. When it comes to like all of these games, so last time we talked, you hadn't done Horizon yet. That's how long ago it was.
That's crazy. Yeah. So I guess I had talked to you kind of at the tail end of just Dead Rising. So I left Capcom back in, I think it was 2017, 2018, about a year and a half before Capcom Vancouver shut down. And that was after this January will be 20 years since I moved out west here to be in the games industry. So it's, and at that time in 2006, I joined Blue Castle, which eventually became Capcom Vancouver and stuff. So I'd spent about over a decade there. And then, in about, or actually more than a decade. And then about 8 years ago, I was basically the gig that got me to transition to start my own company with my co-founder, Christian Hurst, for Interleave, was Horizon Forbidden West, and I worked on that for about 4 years. And then the DLC Burning Shores as well. And that kind of gave us a buffer to start building our company Interleave, this is our 8th year now. We have about 32 full-time employees and then lots of other contractors we work with. But basically went from Dead Rising series to Horizon Forbidden West and that world. And at the same time, starting to build Interleave. So we were not just, because we have like a music division, an audio division, and a tech division. So like software engineers that work on working on the latest BioShock game, propping it up and doing all the technical audio kind of stuff with engineers. And then we have sound designers and implementers and that kind of stuff. People actually working like we would in-house, but as external partners with studios. And yeah, we've worked on all kinds of games in the AAA space, the LBE VR space, worked on like Doctor Who and a bunch of other kind of games in the VR space, even continue to work in some linear space with like Netflix and Disney and other companies doing on-set stuff for music supervision or direction and stuff. And then, now we're kind of, the latest one was The Outer Worlds 2 that just came out, and working with all different kinds of partners, like on some unannounced titles, like with Riot and ArenaNet and Tencent and a bunch of other companies and stuff. So
we have actually a bunch of questions about specific games like Outer Worlds and stuff, but I do want to ask you, so Interleave, I'm assuming you guys chose that name because of the meaning of the name. So when you were one of the first composers that I guess I didn't quite understand how often, or maybe not how often, but how it is possible that somebody can come in and assist in like composing. Because if you hear a composer in the past, maybe 10 years prior, you'd hear a name or you'd hear a studio, whatever, and it would be like, okay, your assumption would be that composer did it all. Now games are bigger, things are exploding. All of a sudden I talk to you and find out that it's like, no, that's not it. Not only is that not it, but you've been able to create a company and build up a company that does some of that. And I've definitely watched some of your interviews where you talk about, where you're going in to assist or going in to build out with, if I'm correct, was Horizon, it was about the sheer amount of stuff that was going on in the Horizon games that they look at it and they go, where, especially with 2, but they're like, we've got this certain amount, we just don't have enough manpower, but we're not bringing on a full person. How does that go?
Yeah, so Horizon was a unique one. Obviously, Horizon Zero Dawn did really well. Joris de Man and The Flight and Niels did music for that one. And then the dev team basically realized they wanted to go for a much bigger, like a lot of the fans resonated with the emotional content in that one. And so they realized they had double the amount of cinematics, even triple. It was some crazy amount of cinematics that need to do. And they also, from a music point of view, wanted to really have a lot more emotionally resonant music in it because people responded to that. And so they had spent like a year and a half trying out a bunch of different composers and all that kind of stuff. Even some like popular, well-known music artists and stuff. And basically Dave Gomes, who was a producer with me at Capcom Vancouver, had moved over to Guerrilla in Amsterdam. And I had reached out to him. Literally, I think my son and I had to take your kid to school day, or take your kid to work day when he was still in high school. And one of those things was we had a couple of minutes and we sat down, and I had never played Zero Dawn. And so we started Zero Dawn, and I heard the music at the beginning. I was like, this is beautiful. What is this? And I basically, that was the starting point for me I learned about the game. I was like, man, I want to write that kind of music for games. Cause I had done like 10 years of horror for Dead Rising, which was amazing. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. I always treated it as like a potpourri of like, throw anything in the kitchen sink at the wall. And that was what Dead Rising was for me, which was a lot of fun. But I was like, my own personal writing, for orchestras and choirs and ensembles and stuff was much more emotionally resonant. And so reached out to Dave. He said, oh, let me reach out to the music supervisor because they're still looking for a replacement. They haven't found somebody. Long story short, I demoed for it. It took me like, I don't know, a month or 2 months to actually work on the demo because I wanted to make sure it was perfect. And long story short, got it. They loved it. Got the gig. They flew me out to Amsterdam to meet the rest of the original or Zero Dawn team. Met the audio director, the narrative team, the music supervisor, and kind of the dev team. And really, it became obvious that there was a lot of music to write and a lot of kind of new things that they wanted to write. So when they brought me in, I think I actually ended up writing the most music in Forbidden West out of all the composers, just because there was a sheer amount, but I also had experience like writing for choirs, producing songs, all that kind of stuff. And so they just kept throwing stuff at me. All the composers were divvied up, like you have this area that you're going to do exploration. We had 3 different types of cues. There was kind of general exploration, then this heightened kind of state where you were more like, it was an emotional state that you were doing something like flying in the sky or doing something that had kind of more of a uplifting feeling to it. And then there was the battles as well. There was like in the game, there was diegetic stuff. Like there were some songs where I wrote a bunch of choral stuff there's this Utaru tribe where there's this singing tribe. And they actually sing back and forth with these robot dinosaurs and stuff, which was a lot of fun. But I wrote all that stuff. We recorded it. I conducted. We kind of made it so that you can interact with the choir and with the robots as well and do this kind of back and forth, thing. And then, tons of cinematics, hours of cinematics, and then trailers and stuff. So it was like a very intense 4-year period, but all the while, my partner Christian and I were building Interleave. So we were starting to work on a bunch of different games. Like Scary Girl was this IP that we did this LBE, so location-based entertainment with like 8 players with backpacks.
With the backpacks and the VR or whatever they are. Yeah.
And this was like before Unreal was all the craze. We basically built all the audio from ground up and the music system in Unreal for this LBE. And that led to like, we worked with Archiact on another VR game called Freediver, where you're kind of, it's a VR experience and you're underwater and whatnot. We just kind of started to build, and then that started doing more, some AAA stuff. We started kind of just organically building. And then we went from like 4 of us to like 10 of us, and then from 10 of us to 15, and then to 20, and then now we're at like 32, and the kind of the range of games and all the different things that we have touched is really fascinating. Like I would spend like 2 months on set with Kenny Ortega. He's the guy who created High School Musical, on set, being his music director on set with a big band on stage with like 200 dancers and trapeze artists. 16 hours a day for this crazy show called Julie and the Phantoms for Netflix, which was a musical. That would be, while still kind of checking in on some other projects that we're working on in the game space. So that's kind of has been our world for the last 8 years of like, it's music related or audio related or tech related, but we're kind of like this funnel of like, we have amazing relationships with peers in the industry working in like known titles, indie titles, VR, LBE, and then also, like I said, the linear side, the film and TV or advertising world. And what's cool about it is like, you don't know what's going to connect you with the next cool opportunity. Sometimes sometimes we literally have investors who are like, hey, we typically, like we have one group of investors who they will invest money into soundtracks, but for film and TV. Sometimes you have production companies who don't want to necessarily foot the bill for all the music, and then you have a company that will kind of invest in it and then own that asset afterwards.
Almost.
Or royalties, but also monetizing it and leveraging it for other things afterwards. And so we're like, well, our expertise is in the game space. We have some indie developers who right now we know are looking they don't have the money to finish the budget, or they want to maybe use live orchestra or live whatever. And so we're like, we matchmake and we bring in our investors and other people and create opportunities. And so that, I would say the last 8 years has been, even though I've done kind of core music stuff, a large part of it has been being a creative catalyst of trying to like make connections with developers, with peers that are artists, craft, and experts, right? And just see what we can do to kind of create some cool stuff together. So that's that. Getting back to your original question, that kind of feeds my desire to always want to be trying something new.
It's
But I don't.
orchestrating, but people,
Yeah,
yeah.
and or opportunities, right? Like
Hmm.
sometimes you don't have to do the work, but the fact that you are able to connect people and then maybe give some expertise to save them time and nudge them in the right direction is just as creative as writing music for Horizon or Dead
Right.
Rising or Outer Worlds, right? It's like it's cool because we're trying to be we're trying to be the best partner in the world, and sometimes that can be knowing when to back off and be like, you know what, we're not the best people for this. Let us introduce you to these people, right? And other times it's like more about what if, hey, this is amazing. What if we did this, partnered you with this, brought in this, and then, and it's really about casting a larger vision than what they're actually thinking because you see the potential in what they're starting. So that's kind of been what Interleave has meant to me in the last 8 years is this nexus of amazing artists, technicians, craft experts, and then interfacing with all my peers from the Capcom days, Sony and other people, and being like, hey, we have this expertise. We want to help you. Let's make something cool. And then it's just finding those opportunities to bridge those connections,
When it comes to doing that and sort of creating a business out of that, which isn't necessarily, I mean, it's you, but you have a co-founder that's your partner and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Did you find, like, I guess, did you find difficulty in, at least at first, sort of taking a step back? Or what, did you see it as a breath of fresh air a little bit? Like having a co-partner, it can be difficult having a partner, if there's disagreements. I'm sure you guys had a plan, but I'm just saying, especially what you were doing, you were the person doing what, 15 titles for Dead, if you include the DLC.
Yeah, some crazy number.
Crackle had the I can't remember his name, but they had the actor and they did the little like Dead Rising movie, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so that's all you.
Before adaptations were all the rage. Yes.
You guys sort of got in on that early. Did you find it difficult though to sort of say, okay, I'm gonna, sometimes I am gonna step back? Was that a learning process, or were you sort of just a breath of fresh air being able to do it?
It's a bit of both, to be honest with you, because it's a really good question, and I'm sure you struggle with this too. Is like when you get known for something, then it's both a blessing and it can be a curse as well, in the sense that like you don't want to be tethered to something. I think if I actually honestly take a step back, because of some health issues that I had struggled with, even during my time at Capcom, I didn't tell anybody about the stuff, but I was dealing with some serious health issues at the time. And I think actually I had like chronic Lyme disease and like it was brutal. But I got through it. And what it taught me was, and actually, this is actually a really good story. So my business partner, Christian Hurst, like I said, we spent the last 8 years building this business. We actually came together. He was moderating a paddle on game music that I was on, and we set up to like 5 a.m. one night. This is the first time we met each other in person. And we had all these things that kind of like we had peers who were just getting death marched in game development, like just getting divorces, not seeing their people, like just horrible kind of, it's hard. Making games is very, very hard. And then we both had health issues that we had dealt with. Our families barely ever saw us, right? Like there actually was a real cost to the prolific output that we had put, right? And I think it just kind of came to a head and it was just like, there's got to be a better way to do this that we can sustain. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's 100% better than it was, but it definitely is. Even the fact that starting a business instead of working in a company where I have no agency, really I have no control over what comes down to me, that alone has, although it's been extremely difficult and challenging to build a business and to work in the industry, and especially in the last 2-3 years, it's been chaotic.
Yeah, it has been chaotic.
like with big projects, that we have that have been canceled, where like just managing a company and doing that has been a crazy ride. But I would say just the fact that we have agency to kind of like um, influence our where we go in the trajectory, in some ways is a big breath of fresh air. Although there's risk, there's big risk. With big risk, there's potential reward. But it's almost one of those like we figured it out. We've lasted 8 years, and I'm sure if there's ups and downs, we can figure it out, right? And there's a real power in that of you. My partner Christian mentioned, he's like, "Hey Alexa, like, I get it. You want to be like the best composer that you can out there, but wouldn't you rather like you lean in and invest in like 10 other composers and they become the best people?" Like, and it challenged me. I was like, that's a really good way of looking at it. Is like, yes, I could be it's all about me and whatnot, but I'm like, in some ways, in terms of legacy and in terms of like building more balance and creating a situation where we can support other families and other people, I'm like, yeah, I could take my expertise and lean into people and peers and try to build this business and create opportunities for other people to do what they love. And that's been kind of the MO that we've done, is kind of this half me leaning into me and what is unique about me and my voice. And then the other half is kind of leaning into our people and trying to invest in them and to creatively catalyze their potential. And that's been very rewarding. It's different. There's, one thing I've learned as I've gotten older is like, we don't get anywhere without other people,
Right.
Like even all the opportunities I've had, yes, I have raw talent, but there's so many people, like my wife, my kids, my family, like the amount of endless support that they've given to me. There's no way I could have gotten to where I am right now with the business or with the projects I work on without their support. And creatively and business wise, it's the same thing. Like, it's easy to like go and do PR things and be the face of stuff, but the reality is we have so many people that are supporting us and that we allow us to do what we do because of it. So I've kind of realized that I have to make sure, to the degree we can, to give back and take care of those people as well.
Yeah, I mean, dude, yeah, when I started there, there's definitely there's a competition that occurs at times, but I've always looked at, like, let's say reviews, and I'm like, seriously, I don't really see one person stealing, like, I don't see a big company stealing my video view. Yeah, you may both put something out at the same time, and maybe there'll be less, but it's like overall, it probably isn't. And when I started, that certainly wasn't the case. There was a lot of competition, and I remember somebody reach out. Well, I've talked about it, but Total Biscuit was a big reviewer. He reached out to me for no reason. And there had been a little bit of back and forth between us that wasn't, it was like more, cynical and stuff. And weirdly enough, that was his username. And he contacted me to help me out. And I remember when he did, I was like, that's awesome. Because when I started, I thought it would be more like that, and it wasn't. I was like, okay, no worries. I get it. It's not, it's more like you can only like one, or you can only be the best of this or whatever. And when he reached out to me, I remember when I talked to him, I was like, note to myself, I had already reached out to a couple people smaller, but I was like, I got to make sure that if somebody who is having trouble, if I have time, because you could just eat up your life, but it's like, if I have time and somebody emails, and I'll be like, you know what, I am gonna pass on at least the things that I had difficulty with, to see if maybe this person won't have the same difficulties, because maybe they'll have others. That's the other thing. It doesn't mean that you're going to fix everything for them, but it's nice to sort of go ahead and reach out and be like, hey, I ran into this, and here's an issue here.
I think it makes a huge difference, to be honest with you, because the reality is, like, we work with people, right? Making games, you're dealing with people, and even if they're peers who are in the same sphere that are doing things, it's like, what is it? Rising, all ships rise together, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I really believe it's true. Yes, there's a limit, right? You're not going to, like, at a certain point, you have to be competitive and kind of do your bit. But I also realize, like, sometimes your ability to like get gigs is just based on like, you could have had the better pitch and you don't get it because they know somebody in your sphere of influence in the network. And to me, you getting back to your original question of like, how do you hack? How do you be more efficient? I think being open to any possibility is a huge one for me, and not closing. Like, you can be open to a bunch of possibilities and then narrow in on exactly the one that you're most
Right.
attracted to. But being open is also like always being aware of connections, being aware of like the relationships that you need to foster, even if it is like going to a colleague and being like, "Hey, man, I heard that soundtrack that was amazing." Even if it was the soundtrack that they beat you on,
Yeah.
when you pitched on it well and they won, because it's not a zero sum game. It helps. It's like a good form of energy that you put out into the world, and you never know. It might come back to you, it might not, but it's like it's the right thing to do, right?
Yeah.
It's beneficial. There is so much noise and toxic stupidity
Yeah.
online.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
If you can contribute to like 1% betterment of less toxicity and noise by just a little bit of act of kindness to encourage, a fellow gamer or a fellow, craft expert, why not?
Um,
I like online. I've made myself a rule a long time ago. It's like, I'm never going to post something negative. I'm going to try to always encourage people, just because I'm like, I could do the opposite, but like, what's the point? It doesn't result in anything better out there. In fact, it's probably worse. If I can use my kind of virtual reach outs to people as a way to encourage them, then I found that has been the most beneficial long term,
one of these days I'll learn a new trick, because I certainly am not that way.
I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect, right?
If somebody like, I definitely can get testy if somebody like lies about something, or they say, even if it's about something I'm unrelated to, and they say, "Oh, well,
Sure.
this guy worked on the game from this year to this year," and I'm like, "No, they didn't. What are you talking about?" I get, because there's so much. It's not just toxicity; it's misinformation that seems to creep in.
Let's just be clear, though, that is part of your role, though, is to clarify things.
It is,
right?
yeah.
So you are a beacon and a filter on one hand of like trying to separate the signal from the noise, and that's your role. That's different than just being a jerk because you want to be a jerk online, right? So
I mean, I'm trying to learn that too, but
okay, well, focus on 1%.
Focus on 1%.
Yeah.
Speaking of opportunities, so I was surprised when they were like, "Hey, Outer Worlds," and dude, that is very cool. Horizon, Horizon, like the Burning Shore, all that stuff made sense to me. Outer Worlds, I didn't know what to think. Like, I was like, Outer Worlds is an eclectic game, and it fits you because I still think you're one of the most really honestly eclectic composers I've met, because a lot of composers, not that they don't experiment, but I don't hear it as much. If that makes sense. They sort of, and I love their stuff. What I'm saying, so like Justin Bell, who worked on Outer Worlds 1, you took over for this. Austin, who is very eclectic as well. He loves his stuff. But when I got to talk to you originally, and we talked about like different instruments, you definitely have I don't want to say, I'm not disparaging anybody else, but it feels like what I hear from you when I go and find your stuff or whatever, I find something on SoundCloud or I find something, it's always more not experimental. There's just a wider breadth that I notice from you. And maybe this is just me picking up on what we've talked about before, but even in some of your tracks, and then I find out you guys did the radio stuff. And I got to admit, boy, did everything make sense. I don't know why, but those are the stickiest part of Outer Worlds 2 to me. Some of the radio tracks, there's a lot of tracks I like on that, and I like a lot on 1 as well. They're different beasts, really. But I've always wondered, is that just a part of you saying, I'm going to focus on not necessarily you and what you like to do, but like, how do you even get information about what a game's going to be? I've always been confused. Like, do you get a piece of paper and it's a person's face and they're like, this is the main character, write the theme? Or do they say, we want more cymbals, like more cowbell? Like, how the hell do you, because Abzi asked the same thing. He's like, how much, or Solar did, he was like, how much do these guys even know about how are they creating something if
Right.
it's being built at the same time and you guys have such a wide, I mean, tons of instruments, what key, everything. Like, how does that usually come to you? How do you know, how do you even create in that instance? Because I don't understand how you do it.
So let's dive into a couple of those things. So one, most composers, it depends when you're brought in. If you're brought in really early, or if you're brought in kind of midway or towards the end, that can make a big difference, because your ability to, because I had worked in-house at Capcom for many years, I was involved in like pre-production, even before, like conceptualizing how to reinvent the franchise and what we want to do. So, and even we would work on different types of IPs altogether, totally different than Dead Rising at the time. And so I had experienced in many ways the value of the what if, like, what if we did this? And sometimes
Oh,
it's
okay.
like you have mood boards. Sometimes like you literally have a lead concept artist or the art director who will have like a mood board where it's like they have some kind of like a main character art and maybe like a setting that they've done of just a 2D or a 3D rendition of it, but of some kind of art for the vibe of the game that you want to pitch. So this is before you go even to production, where you've locked and greenlit the actual thing.
Okay.
You're just pitching an idea. And often we'll do proof of concept videos where, maybe they'll have a VTAR, like a visual target of like an area of the game where they've arted it up, made it really cool, give you a sense of like, this is the feeling that you're going to experience when you experience this game. And we will often have to write like a theme suite of music or some vibe for it.
Okay.
Really, which is kind of like a musical target for the vision that this game is going to feel like. And that includes a palette, that includes like a main motif sometimes, or sometimes an arc, right? Like sometimes it's like, if it's like a VTAR, then essentially it's more of an ambient cue that you play. But other times it's kind of like a trailer where you write a piece of music as a suite, and people walk away like, kind of like the Outer Worlds 2 main theme that I did. It's like it takes you on a journey from the very low to the very high and back down, and you feel like you're like it encapsulates kind of the feeling and the arc of what you're going to experience in the story. So there's those kind of situations where you're like brought in very early on the concept phase, and that kind of then thereafter it's more about how do we branch this out and scale it up to full production. How many minutes of music? How many areas of the game? Where do we need to have contrast between this part of the world, this part of the world? If there's are there NPCs? What are they like? Are there factions? Are there main characters? Are there understories, like subtext that we need to convey through music that we can't through narrative until midway through the story? Like there's all these different things that they're like derivatives of that initial concept, right? And they're more about you just need to know the role of music at that point in terms of what it's doing to hit that. Sometimes it's like diegetic music, like we got to populate the world with a radio, we got to populate the world with whatever. Sometimes it's like we want to make sure that you walk away from this area of the game humming the main theme, right? Like whatever the role of music is, it's kind of you map out topographically or within like literally, like you could just have it on a board with sticky notes of like, we're going from this act to this act, and the transition from here and this is the role. So there's that world. On other ones, sometimes you literally do not see the game at all, and you just get a paragraph. This is the setting.
Right.
This is the vibe that we want. Go to town, right? I typically like to have, at least in that case, if it's like a battle type of track, because the tempo and the kind of density of the arrangement really is dependent on the speed of the footfall animations, like how quickly you're transversing through the world or whatnot really makes a difference. Like if you go like 5 beats per minute slower or faster, that could be the difference between it'll feel off, but also like it can change how the intention of the player feels. Like it's like you're weak or you're in charge,
tentative
right?
or aggressive or okay, gotcha.
Exactly.
I gotcha.
And
okay.
So, and those are kind of details that really do matter on the end result of how you, as a gamer, will experience the actual first time you play that level or whatnot. So it's very important, but you're not even getting there until you've established the general vibe of like what you want this track to feel like and what its function is. And then there's other times where, so like on Horizon Forbidden West, I kept on telling them, hey, we got to do a song. I love producing and writing songs and stuff. And I think there's some key narrative moments in the game that we should do this. Um, and so they kept it in the mind. And then one of their sound designers Lavisa had actually written, because they were trying to figure out what we're going to do for the intro credits for the game. And she had written a initial version of the song In the Flood. It was called something different at the time. And long story short, they were like, why don't we put you and her together and you guys can try to figure something out. And that was the case of like, you have the game, it's there. And then everybody's like, we need a tentpole moment in the game. Kind of like Red Dead Redemption, you know, when you're on the horse and you hear a hose that comes
what
off.
I was going to bring up. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's
so,
iconic.
Right. So and that is like, I would not say that they knew at the beginning, like, we need to have a strong song at the very beginning of the game. That's more as production goes on, it just becomes obvious that there's definitely an emotion that is going through the development experience. And we're like, it's becoming obvious that we need something. And we have a suspicion that this is a good idea. And they're like, Oleksa, you go produce this and write it out with Lavisa and then take it and do your thing. And then I did it, and then it became like wow, this is like a unique thing. And then they actually ended up extending some of the credits and kind of working on a transition once they heard the result of it. But it's not like we had this clear idea at the very beginning that it's going to be this long. Sometimes you just need to have almost like a frame of a house. You know, you got the wood frame is up and you have the roof, but you don't exactly know how you're going to divide some of the rooms and what's going to be featured and stuff. It's kind of like
analogy. That. I get what you're saying. That makes way more sense now when you described it that way. Okay.
Now on the Outer Worlds 2, getting back to your original question about kind of me and my eclectic interests, and like, did you know that you wanted to mash up the Muppets with Moulin Rouge?
Exactly.
And, right, like for me, when we were talking with Tony and Leonard, the game, the creative director and the production director for Outer Worlds 2, when they said we have this faction, the Protectorate, and this is the kind of, they're authoritative, they're kind of, you know, this is their vibe. My mind went right there. I was just like, I'm doing those cues. Like, I have to do those cues, because it was both a marriage of like, I knew what the story would, what would add to it, but also like my own interests. You know, like I used to lead a polka band and stuff. Kind of like Dave Matthews meets a polka band, like Gogol Bordello and stuff. And I was like, I want to do this just purely out of fun. Like this would be so much fun to do. And so then at that point, once I was committed to that, and obviously there's a process. We work with the writers, trying to find the narrative, connection, the lore, making sure it was like good. But at a certain point, once you've kind of framed that up, using the house analogy again, then it was more like, okay, I got the Christmas tree. Now I'm just going to like throw all the different ornaments I can and string it with lights and do everything that I can to like bring it to life and make it the most freaking buzzing, amazing Christmas tree that I can. Because to me, that's these are hard to produce. I want to have fun doing it.
Yeah.
I want the musicians and the singers who actually perform it to have fun singing it, because I know that both of those, me being excited and the musicians and the performers being excited and the writers and the game directors and stuff being excited, will ultimately translate into like infectious vibe in the game that it'll be an attractant on its own. It's kind of like the bee is, it doesn't buzz looking for crap. It basically is buzzing around looking for pollen. It knows when it finds pollen, it's going to keep going back to that because it's attractive, right? And that's when my role as music director is like making sure that we're like making these songs catchy, earwormy. Yes, they have to be on point and tied into the game narrative and the lore, but ultimately they're like, I know these live on their own as soundtracks in the, once the players put down the controller and they walk into the rest of their life, if there's something that's sticky from a game or a melody that speaks to them or some crazy combination of instruments this eclecticism that speaks to them or energizes them. I'm like, that's the kind of stuff that we need to invest in and make sure that it's guided and ushered really well, because it's going to live on its own outside of the game. It's going to call back to the game when they hear it. It'll be reminding them the first time they heard it, but it's got to stand on its own. So that's kind of where I get very passionate about, like, producing it like really well, world class. Yes, throwing the kitchen sink at it and then seeing what sticks. And that's kind of been my approach when I did Dead Rising. Even when I did Horizon, the Horizon kind of canvas was kind of restricted in terms of, like, it's, we're not using big choirs like Carmina Burana choir stuff. It's a very specific sound. But what I ended up doing on Horizon, for example, was I threw the kitchen, like, I literally started buying different instruments off of, like, Facebook Marketplace, going and just doing everything from, like, I had a friend who had a big, like, 70 string harp, and I would take it and I would play stuff and retune it, and I would bow things, and I would, like, use mallets, and, like, kind of, rather than using synthesizers, my eclecticism was in taking these acoustic instruments and generating rhythms and textures and stuff out of them. And that was what was exciting to me, was, like, just using acoustic instruments and all these, like, found articles as a new canvas. Sometimes it's the canvas, sometimes it's the notes, sometimes it's the people you work with. You don't really know, and sometimes you don't really have a choice. Like, it is what it is. But within each of those experiences, that's what I find invigorating. And with the business side, it's the same thing. All these different cool types of projects that we can work on, and all these different IPs, all these different developers that we get to interface with, that is invigorating for me, because it's always novel. There's always a new possibility. And yeah, I consider myself very, very blessed that way, that I'm able to kind of interface with that on a daily basis.
It's interesting too, because this might explain why, like, I first tracked you and all that, because 3 or 4 of my favorite composers all say the exact same thing you just did, which is that they randomly go grab shit and they're like, this could be an instrument. Hans Zimmer did the YouTube interview where he talked about Lowe's home furnishings and the other home place being his favorite place to go get pipe parts to make flutes.
Oh yeah.
And he's like, he spends more there, he thinks, than, like, his professional instruments, because they go all the time. And Dying Light, 2, the main composer for that, the entire main soundtrack the main theme is written on a bicycle that was post-apocalyptic parts, because he was like, what could you, if you had a bike in a post-apocalyptic zombie world, what would it sound like? And the entire main theme is on a bike and playing the spokes and hitting things on it, but it still makes a song. But it just has that sound where you're like, and I remember turning that game on, for instance, and going, I have no clue. I couldn't even pick out the instruments, because now I found out there are no real instruments in that. Well, to him there are. But I remember hearing it going, what is this? Like this, and that has sat for me. Divinity Original Sin, some of those games where, and that's games 25, 30 years old. But when I hear the music for a particular part or that theme in particular, I'll be like, oh, where your brain, Fallout 3, I don't want to set the world on fire. You'll hear these certain things. You'll be like, what the hell? And then, like you said, it'll remind you if you hear it somewhere else. You'll be like, I remember the game. I remember that exact part. Hellblade 2. Speaking of timing, I wanted to mention just how impressed I was playing Hellblade 2, and there's a boss in that attacks you on the beat. And it was one of the, dude, I'm telling you, when you play a game that doesn't have great music, I get it. It's, some people have the music off. I don't know what's wrong with them. There's definitely a physical ailment they have, and I don't want to get whatever infection they have. I need to hear the music. But when I was playing that game, and the first time it went to this massive attack went on the beat, I remember just going like, what the shit? That would have felt horrid if it had been either off or if it had been your sort of generic melodic in the background. Now, speaking of Horizon, so I went back and listened to a bunch of your tracks the second one. Can you explain what that. So Austin mentioned, I think when he was talking to you, synth, he said something, then he corrected himself. It's not really, he said something about some of the tracks were synthwave, and then he was like, well, that's not right, but I don't know what they are. There is something about the way those tracks in that game go where there's this it's the futuristic part. So you have the tribal, and especially one of the ones, and I'm sorry I don't remember the names because you guys got a lot of music for that game.
Yeah,
but dude, there's so many tracks, but there's the percussion, and it's like got the tribal, that character, maybe the feeling of her running around. But then it's got this synth that's going like weird crunchy warbles going on and all that kind of stuff. What would you call? What would I call that if I was telling somebody I liked that? Is there a name for that, or is it just like Horizon? That's the genre.
I mean, that was kind of the Horizon. I mean, so really, that was an amalgamation of like very organic with very synthetic, and basically, I mean, really, that has to do with literally the narrative of the game of the fact, right? But I mean, if you're telling somebody in an elevator how to describe it,
that's what I mean. Like, can you? Is it?
I mean, the closest I would say is it would be like, you know, I don't want to reduce it to this, but it would be like, you know, if, what can we say? It'd be like if you took, what's his name? The guy that did not Andor. Trying to remember the.
Not John.
No, the modern guy. The guy that did Black Panther, the composer. I'm forgetting his name right now.
Yeah, I don't know his.
But it'd be kind of like if you took that, mixed it with some Vangelis, you know, like, because it's really like this 80s kind of like synthesizer
it
vibe.
Definitely is, yeah.
Right? And then kind of, it'd be like abstract, synthetic, organic material, right?
Okay.
So you are taking organic elements like acoustic instruments like tribal percussion or even bowed things, but then we're morphing it and modifying it using like synthetic devices like modulation, synths, effects, bit crushing, doing whatever you want to it. And then couched with that is you have these like there's almost nostalgia in some of the like the melodies that are there, but they're played in a way with using kind of like a Vangelis kind of, you know, that 80s kind of bigger than life canvas. And then we mix live strings and other like woodwinds and other things, and then the female voice as well on top of it. And that amalgam of all those different elements gives you that sound. So for me, for example, on a lot of the keys that I did, I had this great patch that I could perform the and literally would be with aftertouch on my synth, basically, where I was literally like it wasn't like drawing things. I was like literally performing like single notes, but like pitch bends and all these kind of weird things where, to me, that was part of a lot of fun working on the Horizon stuff, was that I could like literally sculpt just with like this one synth patch and modulators. I could literally choose a single note, but just make it so fun to play that it kind of would just work on its own.
It's funny because I was listening to them, and I, as a big fan of those games, because I'm a huge fan. I mean, it only makes sense. Dinosaurs and, you know, futuristic stuff like that to me is, if you added ninjas, that would be the only way it would be better. And to hear it, you know, sometimes you'll hear that music that really fits, even though it's different. Like you'll hear music and you'll be like, you know what, this works, even though it's not what I expected. It works quite well. And then you get something like that where, to me, honestly, it would be difficult to really identify some other music with it now, because I'm like, okay, that's become its own nostalgia. Speaking of nostalgia, it's its own thing now. So when I think of Horizon, I couldn't put some Zimmer track on there and be like, okay, that works. Or something like you said, you know, huge orchestras would would have lent the entire game a different feel that I actually don't think would replicate the game as well. I don't think it would fit.
So it was this mix also of like a very intimate sound, but on a grand scale. It's kind of a weird, like I literally recorded my instruments in a way to have that option. So I literally, some people will just record like a flute or like a whatever bowed instrument or guitar with like one mic, or percussion even with one mic or two mics, whatever. And I actually literally set up my mics in quad, so I'd have like even shakers. So this is
Oh, interesting.
You got this. You think of like what's his name, Pharrell Williams, and his whole shtick with cowbells and being a cowbell and everything. I would say Horizon is like, you have to have the snake shaker everywhere.
Yep.
Right. But for me, it was important. I was like, it has to be super intimate, but also has to kind of be 3D at the same time. So I literally set up like, 4 mics, basically 2 sets of like stereo pairs that I could literally perform within, so that when you literally heard it on your headset or whatnot, it literally kind of felt like it was like literally here, but also kind of had some 3D space to it. And I applied that to everything within the stuff that I recorded for Horizon, because it was like one of the mandates was like, we want this intimate, organic, upfront kind of sound, almost like a dry sound, even though it's not dry. But this idea that there's this intimacy, like you are really close to Aloy, the main character, essentially, in the game. And then coupled with these bigger, larger gestures, like with the Vangelis synth or like the string, chamber ensemble playing these bigger motifs with the flutes and stuff like that. And so that combination of something in the background, which is like larger than life, and then the more intimate sounds that are 3D but very close and intimate, gives you that kind of feel that you want in the soundtrack.
So going from there to Outer Worlds 2, which a lot of the stuff, I think, first of all, I love diegetic stuff. I love anything on radio. I don't know why that attracts me so much, but it feels like a secondary fantasy world that I'm like, if I'm hearing their music, there's something that's magic. It's the first time I ever heard it in a game, I was like, I didn't know. Of course their radio would be playing. But I was there's so many games you played when you were younger that they didn't have, it just wasn't even a thought. And then that first time you're like, oh, instead of the radio being a 3D asset, just sitting there, it's like I'm hearing what they were hearing or whatever. And we've exploded now to where, we see all this being possible. When you're doing work for like an Outer Worlds 2, and it's, I don't know, the genre for Outer Worlds 2, there's like a lot of cynical patriotism, I guess. There's depending on which faction, obviously. Right. And then obviously the huge old school throwback kind of stuff. How did you know at least a couple of those, like, this is sort of what I want to do, this is how I want to handle this particular thing? Or was that almost all experimentation? Because I know, depending on, like you said, when you come in to start working, it was a combination of both. We were involved, like, I think we worked on Outer Worlds 2 for 4.5 years, again because we had actually initially come in at Interleave. They had hired us to help them on their technical audio side. So kind of after Outer Worlds 1 had shipped, they knew they were going into production, but they needed help kind of really enhancing their mix bus structure, a lot of their technical infrastructure for their audio systems. And so we were brought in early to do that, then even some sound design. And then they brought me in as music director and principal composer to start kind of building out the actual musical world. So part of that process was like Tony, Brandon, the game director, already knew that he wanted to have radio and to really invest in it. That was really important. But then Tony and Leonard, Auntie's Choice was a faction that was carried over from the original one. And so there was already kind of a sense of what that, like, we couldn't really veer much from what that was, but it was about expanding that world. Yeah. And so we did some initial exploration work, and then I got busy with other score and then working on Protectorate stuff. So they brought in Jim Bonney, who had worked on I think it was BioShock Infinite with Joe Fielder, the narrative director. They had worked on some stuff. Great music.
So they brought him in to basically flesh out the Auntie's Choice faction and the Order of the Ascendants. We had done preliminary work, like we did a Fibonacci song for the Order of the Ascendants, which was kind of
love that song.
So we had done a lot of exploration of, like, we have even did things with like more kind of sacred kind of choral elements and trying to figure out, like, what is this blend of things. And so essentially we handed it off to Jim at one point after we had done that initial work, and he kind of ran with it. So we had a clear idea of, like, all three factions had different vibes, and that was part of the original plan altogether. It just became refined as we went into the production. With regards to the Protectorate, we knew they were authoritarian. We wanted to, some of the original things were like, well, we want military, state, choir, orchestra, and then it was more about like shaping like I was not interested personally in just authority for the sake of authority, because I was like, that's pretty lame personally. I'm like, it's pretty on the nose. And also my mind is like, okay, this faction, yes, these are people who are literally mentally refreshed or lobotomized,
Right.
against their free will. But at the end of the day, they're still human, and they do have agency at a certain point. And if it's radio and it's music that they sing in their pub or at home or whatever, it has to have some kernel of humanity in it. And so that was for me, where it's like, even though they had thumb down from the top up from the authority, I wanted some life in the music that they had. And so we were like, let's make this kind of like the Protectorate's version of lounge music, mixed with, if we're gonna do like state, military, orchestra, and choir, let's mash it up and make it more Broadway, and hence my Moulin Rouge meets the Muppets, meets Balkan Brass, and just to give it more life and energy. Because they told me, hey, these songs, if we're going to invest all this money, they have to be catchy, they have to be fun, they have to have earworms. And so for me, there's no way to do that just with a straight-laced authoritarian kind of style.
That's just celebrating the nation or celebrating whatever. Yeah,
whatever,
that wouldn't even have been good. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
It's not that we didn't do that. We did do that. We had a fanfare, we had a chorale, we had a polkas, we had like whatever. But it was like doing it in a way where it should still, at least for me, one of my tenets has always been like, if I'm going to write music for games where people spend hundreds of hours on it, like I want it to be at least life-giving in some sense. Like even if that's just, it puts a smile on your face. The words can be like cryptic and really dark and twisted, but if the music itself kind of like invigorates you and put a smile on your face, that is something that's always been important. Even in the Dead Rising stuff, that was one of my central things. It was just like, if it's the only time people get to hear yodeling is in Dead Rising.
Right. We talked about that last time.
Or kazoos in Outer Worlds 2.
Yep.
It's like
and laughter.
To me, and laugh, right?
That it was that meant to be in the track?
Oh yeah. Like so how would you say, not laughter as much as just
well, you hear like breathing, chuckling or something. There's a couple times where I was like, that doesn't sound like the instrument. It doesn't sound like they're continuing. There was something about it that sounded off, like a human was on the other end, and you wouldn't be able to say, oh, that was an instrument that I played versus that was a person.
Like on one of them, there was the one Protectorate song, Give Me Your Hand, where we literally had them do stomping, and be, two hands are better than one, but, and so then I'd record them saying, but, and we'd all be like, but, right? And, I mean, it's very stompy, very Broadway kind of the vibe, and it's catchy, but yeah, to me, it's important to like have as much humanity in it as possible, right? So if it's breathing, if it's noises, if it's whatever, I don't know. I think people like it. People know when it's too forensic and too like clean. So I like messing things up, with intention, not just to have chaos, but I like having that raucous kind of human vibe. It's kind of like the, births, weddings, and funerals. All three of those are very human. They're different stages of life, but they're all accompanied by music. And music literally plays a huge like leading role in like navigating those things. And that's kind of how I treated this, was like, these factions, the radio represented them. Even if it was veiled, it still represented them. And that was important to come across, that either in the music and the instruments, or how they performed, that some of their humanity could come through.
Well, not only that, that's what I took from it, is that when you look at like the Protectorate stuff, it's almost like that's their sign. Yeah, they're lobotomized or whatever you want to call it, but there's a little bit of almost rebellion or like
Totally.
a
Rebellion is
tongue in cheek, a little hook, where you're like,
totally.
wait a minute, is that really? And it, you'll hear, it's almost like a raucous song. You might hear trainees at a military sing that's a little dirty when they're running.
Totally.
It's still on a beat. You'll hit, Casey Jones was a son of a, and you're like, okay, that's a military style song. But what he's saying is completely unacceptable, where you guys dialed down the unacceptable. But there's still something there where you're like, like I said, it's almost like a little reminder to them that there is still some humanity, and then that comes across in the narrative when you're playing the game. There are some characters that you can tell. I mean, some of the first people you meet in that game, you're like, okay, that's a person, or this person was normal. They've been lobotomized. Like how does all that sort of play out? So I thought that was great.
That was important to me. Different people have different. They can ascribe different intentions to it, but that would be something that really guided me in the actual music composition and production of that stuff, was just because it's too, people are complex, our world is complex, and I kind of feel like we are served often these very reductionist and very oversimplified caricatures of what human experience is like. And I'm like, I can't do the same thing for the music. Like, it has to have, sure, it can have a lane, and it can stick in the lane that's different than, the Protector is different than Auntie's Choice and is different than the Order of Ascendance. I get that. But within each of these, there has to be some sense of nuance. Otherwise, there's no depth. There's nothing, like, it's like, I'd rather listen to a sine tone or noise, like, like signal, right? Like,
yeah,
it is what it is. And that's kind of like the ultimate form of like, sticking to a lane. It's like, well, how interesting is a sine tone or the equivalent, of some simple thing. So I mean, huge kudos to Obsidian and the leadership there for taking a risk on the diegetic stuff, because like you said, it really adds to the immersion in the world building in the world. And it also just kind of creates this stickiness. I don't know.
Yep.
It's like, as you're going around the game, the underscore is great. Antonio on our team wrote a lot of the underscore and did a great job.
Can you explain to people what underscore is so they know which separation?
So in a game like the Outer Worlds 2, or any kind of game where you have, so underscore would be, you're watching a movie, it's a drama, it's not a documentary, and you hear music that is played that is supposed to make you feel a certain emotion. Sometimes it's like in keeping with what the emotion of the actors is on screen. Sometimes it's the opposite. But it plays a role. It's there to kind of like emotionally modulate what you're supposed to feel at a given time. So that is kind of like scored underscore. In a game, the equivalent would that be is if you're exploring or if you're on a mission or something, there would be music that would be underscore. So it's underscoring your experience of that. Diegetic music is literally music. So underscore would be considered non-diegetic, right, meaning it's not in the world.
It's the player hearing it on their own.
The player hearing it on your own, and it's really a function of the emotion that you're supposed to feel. Diegetic music, or radio music in the world, or people playing instruments in the world, or singing or talking, that is something that is part of the narrative. It is there to make you feel like the world you're exploring is believable, it's real, you're immersed in it, and you kind of suspend disbelief because you become so immersed in it that you almost like, if you hear somebody talking behind you, you're like, you turn your head because it's that immersive, right?
Yep.
So the music's role in that world is to bind you to what is real in that game world. So in Horizon, an example of diegetic music would have been, they had a singing robot. The robot sings a note, the choir responds. You see the choir on screen. In the game, on the screen, and it's like, it's not kind of like here. It's like it's part of the world. So if they're over 100 feet away, they sound like they're 100 feet away.
Right.
Whereas the main theme that plays, or music that is like as you're going through and just kind of is there and is giving you sensation in your body, that's the underscore itself. That's essentially modulating your emotions as you're going through the game.
I think Austin corrected me on that too. I'll have to go back and listen, because generally, so even though, especially when I was young, made music, it wasn't for games, and then ended up doing some music for mods. But at that time there was no diegetic music. There was just music.
Mhm.
And so what we would call your underscore is just your ambient music, your vibe. We, that's the vibe right now, is this sort of thing that's undercurrent and you can feel where it's pushing you, and maybe it ramps up when you're near an enemy and then turns into something different. So that's good to hear, because I know that a lot of people will be wondering like what those particular things mean. I want to talk just for a second. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Before you jump,
yeah,
it's also important to note that there is like a gray area in between, where sometimes you can have, like, you have this in films often, where you're hearing a song that's vibe, it's a montage, they're playing a bunch of cool stuff, and then it morphs into like cut to a shot of you're driving in a truck, and that song you were hearing is now on the radio.
Yeah, yes,
the song on the radio in the truck is diegetic. Its function prior to that, when it was full range and not on a radio during a montage, was all about vibe. So that's kind of like an example of like, we can kind of blend both worlds. One can transition to one or the other, and sometimes they can live halfway through. On Outer Worlds 2, for example, the final battle, the Sovereign Ship's battle, is a perfect example of this, where I had written a song for the Protectorate called Resolute, which is like 16 words, like duteous, all these kind of single words that described kind of the whatever the Protectorate as, like, get themselves pumped up before battle. It was sung with a choir and military straight orchestra and stuff, and it's playing in the world as you're actually exploring on your final battle, different people, as a song on speakers in the world. And then as you encounter your first ending battle, it morphs into like a scored version of it. So it goes from these speakers in the world diegetically over loudspeakers to like full range, like vibe underscore for your battle, but it's amped up. So the version of it, we added more strings, more brass, more choir to it. And then it kind of escalated. You go back, and then it goes back to the song again on the loudspeakers, and then you encounter it again. And this time, then it's a much more amplified version of it, where the strings are like playing at double the speed. We bring in the main theme because it's your final battle to wrap up the very end against the Sovereign. And it works really well because, it starts with a song which, it's kind of like the radio, when you go full range and you come to the truck and you just have that. The difference in this case is it's over a long period of time. So in a film, you would have a montage that's like a minute and a half that you do that. But in a game, you could be sitting in that, like, depending on where you go, whether you encounter things, it could take 30 minutes. And so that kind of amount, that's where games are really amazing at, like, leveraging the world building and the diegetic stuff within the world, and then the interactive music design around it. Because depending on your play style, like I said, you could get there within 5 minutes. Other times it could take you 30 minutes to get there. And you don't get that in any other medium,
right?
Where it kind of like stretches, that kind of morphing between the diegetic and the underscore. You can kind of, it's almost like an accordion, actually. Like, it kind of like, you can stretch it out, and then basically the battle starts and you're like this, and then you come back out in the world. And that's all a function of being interactive by its nature. Just want to clarify that.
Oh no, that's very good. Also, I want to make sure we're an hour and a half. You're still good for time.
We're good. Yeah.
Okay. So talking about like how it adjusts, I always get the question asked composers, because Austin's given me some answers. I'm sure I asked you last time, but we'll ignore that because I can't remember the answer. But when you look at especially OSTs, so for years, people would talk about OSTs, reviewers. One of the reasons why I got into reviewing is because people weren't covering music. And I was like, well, that's weird. We're buying OSTs. Like Final Fantasy was one of the top CD selling for years, and you didn't really hear about it. So now we're starting to get, composers are getting the shine that they need. Hopefully credits are done correctly, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to how you adjust for that action. So I've always been I think you and I have talked a little bit about some of the tools, and I know Justin was talking about MWise for some of the stuff. I think that's a tool name he was talking about. But how in the hell do you write something knowing that it may cut or go short? And the reason why I bring this up is because games are also, the one positive of games that I love is the interaction that you get. However, The number of times, dude, I can tell you the number of times a game has spoilered me on a major change because the trigger was too soon or the stinger went, and I was like, bad guys. Far Cry 5, one of my favorite musical games ever, and I don't even like that kind of music, and I think it's one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard, spoils 3 or 4 of the main fights because the trigger goes too quick. How do you write music that you know needs to go up or down or change or go into tempos that change because of a boss or whatever? How do you do that? And was that difficult? Because I know you work with Thaddy Newton on the Canadian Spy or the TV show. You've done shows and movies and you're doing the linear stuff. How do you translate from that to games? And then was that difficult?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There's lots of ways we can go about it. I think for me, because I came from linear, and then when I went to Blue Castle and Capcom, I was in-house and I was literally like parsing through code, working with people who are actually building the game, not just like software engineers, game designers, mission scripters, the whole bit. So you kind of learn how games are made and how they're called. So for example, what you were just talking about, like spoilers, particularly in horror or like games where there's like these jump scares or whatnot, a lot of it really comes down to timing windows. So let's just pause for a second the whole idea of like how to write the music and just talk about the actual like triggering, because if you like literally the difference between you saying that was the best music, that's the best music you've ever heard in a game, could have been the difference between had they like delayed it by 1,500 milliseconds, right?
Yeah.
If you think about that just for a second, that's crazy. The fact that, but it makes total sense, because the art of making games, there's a core game loop, fine, that makes sense, and that's predicated upon like it's challenging enough but not too challenging, and it's pushing you forward to go to the next stage or whatever you're going to explore. So that's one reality. The second one is the rate at which you introduce new things has to have a pacing and a cadence to it, right? And it's the same thing in, if you think of like your game experience as like, okay, 50 hours, 100 hours as your total like lifetime experience of that IP is one thing. Then think about your sit down of actually playing it in situ for an hour or 2 hours at a time.
Right.
That is getting back to our Chronos and Kairos. That is one concept of time. Then think about it as in like, in this boss battle or in this mission for the next 90 seconds, that's one chunk of time. And so how you delineate all the important things that you need to get across in that 90 seconds is much different than the 50 hours or 100 hours or the 2 hour sit down or your first hour of the game. Most dev studios spend tons of time on the first hour of the game because there's a big fall off, like 70% or 80% of people don't play after that.
Yeah.
So that makes total sense. Like, you're going to front load everything that's important. Sometimes they'll spend a lot of time on tutorials to make sure that is really interesting and not too difficult, but also kind of starts to expose people to the basic core mechanics that are important. And people kind of latch on to that tutorial, like they learn to love the game because of that first section. But the designers don't really design the game that way. They actually want you to get to chapter 1, forget about the tutorial. But the way you experience it as a game is you actually ended up spending a lot of time in the tutorial. So how it's actually developed and the timing of all the things that are given to you is a big difference. The piece of music that plays during that tutorial can end up being your favorite song or the most hated song in the soundtrack.
Yeah.
Just by virtue of you playing it over and over again.
Yes.
So with regards to like timing, I would say that is kind of it's an art form which, to be honest with you, there's not a ton of great architects, I would say, game architects out there. I think the ones who do it masterfully, there's a reason those games are like, 95 plus Metacritic,
right?
Because they have tuned their games so well, not just for like how hard things are to play, but the timing of all those, when something lands. Before a big event happens, you need to have a bit of a calm before the storm,
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah. If you don't have a respite, it doesn't work. It falls apart. Yeah.
And so I would say in many ways, like I would much rather have that and spend like 50% of my music budget on music timing in the game versus 50% of it to make it as interactive as possible. It's not that interactivity is not good. you have to right size it for the experience, right? So if you are playing for 10 hours and only 20 minutes of it is like hardcore in the moment boss battle stuff, you're probably going to want to just like write a 3.5 minute cue with maybe, or 2 3 minute cues for like a battle that's in 2 parts or 3 parts with intros and outros, and then maybe modulate between other stuff to give you a
Sure.
sense of quite a bit of interactivity. Just because when you're playing those battles, you're really like, there's so much going on that like, why would you waste your effort on all this interactivity when they're not going to feel that?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're exploring for like an hour in a ambient area through a forest or whatever, and timing is everything, right? Like,
Yeah, it is.
you hit that note and then something rustles in the bushes. You got to carve out space to make out that rustling. You don't want loud music. You don't want a melody
Yep.
that's going over, right? So that's where the interactivity makes a difference. You have more space to breathe. Everything is a lot more intentional because the weight of it, because there's not a lot going on, is very important. So you are fine tuning the weight of what music is doing in those moments. You have to be much more disciplined and careful of like what is in the foreground and what's drawing attention. And that's where I think it's worth spending time, like I said, muting, deleting, pausing, delaying, bringing things sooner. Like we would do this when we was at Capcom. We developed this tool which would essentially literally, it was primarily for QA testers that we would have, but also for us, where we would like, I would be like, guys, I want the equivalent of like, at that time I was like, I want the equivalent of like a VCR tape or like literally a capture of the gameplay experience of the last 10-15 minutes, so that I could literally go back and rewind and press play and it would re-trigger every single event and I could see all the intensities and everything. And we would literally take that stuff and go and like tweak, delay this up by 2 seconds, tighten this up from like, from 1 second to like 200 milliseconds. And those micro adjustments was what made the game feel right. Right? And we're talking like micro adjustments. We're not talking big grand gestures. We're talking about things that like, like if my goal is to like fit like this, something that's not timed right is kind of like, it's there, I'm making it work, but it's not like, it's not fitting like
this. It doesn't resonate together is one thing. Yeah.
But the reason it doesn't resonate is because it's literally fighting, there's friction.
Yeah.
Right? So in sound and music, literally, if you have 5 things playing at once, you have a couple of options. One is you either balance them so that they still sound like one sound, right? So you change the volumes of each. You can move them apart so you can hear them discreetly, right, in time. Or you just get rid of like 3 of them and stagger that so that you can make it out, and they both actually have more impact than all 5 going on at the same time. And that principle applies to kind of like everything. Like whatever you can clear the space to make room for it to like breathe, it's going to have more impact. You're going to remember it. You're going to feel it on your controller as like a much better experience, and it's going to come through across the screen and through the speakers as something powerful, because there literally is nothing like fighting against it. There was a producer called, he used to be the producer for the band Heart. And I remember, he's here in Vancouver. I remember meeting with him once. And I remember him talking to me like, how did you get, he had done a song with Katie Lang that he produced. And I was like, how did you get that sound of her voice in the mix? Like, that was just, it blew my mind how he got her voice to sit in the mix so well. He's like, Oleksa, it's really simple. Whatever note she sang, if you play a chord on a guitar, it's like if she was singing this note, I just didn't play that note. I literally just played the other notes around it and didn't play that. Left the gap.
Yeah.
He didn't mix it differently or anything, but again, it's a really simple example of like, even at the fundamental level of like, just subtract so you can create space for things to like pop out,
we had a cool discussion with Ubisoft, one of the composers for Ubisoft a couple years ago, where we were talking about different ending tunes when you complete a battle. And we spent about 3 hours where I was trying to explain to him why so a lot of games will end on the last hit or when the enemy falls, maybe you'll hear the track. And then there's other ones where it's delayed. And I was trying to explain, not trying as in he didn't understand. I was explaining to him why I liked a particular game I had been playing, because their success track, I guess you would call it, or their tail off that would roll out was delayed, and it made the battle feel longer and harder than if it had hit on the hit. So when I was doing the fight, if I had hit on the hit, it would have been like boom, 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 bang, the person's down. But instead it was like boom, boom, boom. And then there was this music that was like, during a room. And I remember going, oh, I'm almost breathing heavier because it's like I'm still looking around for just a second because the music's still playing. I'm still like, wait, okay, no, there's nobody. And there was this really cool feeling of it being a tiny bit more epic. And then when they switched it up, and it was, weirdly enough, a double stage for a boss, and I hit him, he died right away, the music cut out, and I remember going, nah, that was different.
Not over.
That dude's getting back up, and he got back up, and I was like, that's awesome. Like whoever, it wasn't Kid. I don't remember the man. I'll have to go back and look because he doesn't work at Ubisoft anymore. But I remember being really excited that, this is why I think it's cool that composers are getting like the shine, podcast, whatever you guys do. It's nice to see it because, dude, I'm telling you, most of my memories of games are two things: graphics that don't look near as good as you'll lie to yourself and tell you. You'll lie to yourself and you'll be like, dude, asteroids, I knew what the asteroid was. It was perfectly textured. It's like, no. Yep. But the big thing is music, or a moment in Ghouls and Ghosts or something where you'll get that music and maybe you won't even know. But if you were to sing the Final Fantasy VII success tune, or you were to sing a tune from one of these games that was very popular, sing the success tune, the Battle Over tune, everybody in the world would go, yeah, I know that exact thing. Like they may not even be able to name it, but they'll be like, because it does. And I think the cool thing about music is it can be pretty subtle and still stick in too. That's the other thing, where games have a tendency to, graphics, they, like we were talking about games that hit it perfect, like let's say a Last of Us or something, where, nothing against Last of Us, because I do like it in general, but it feels, it is almost perfectly paced, if that makes sense. There isn't much of a surprise. What I like, and they have some good subtle music, but what I do like is when that game comes along where you'll be playing it, like you said, maybe for an hour where you're exploring, and then that music will subtly change as you go into a new location or whatever. And it won't even be diegetic. It'll just be, they've taken maybe one or two instruments and put them in there, but they're master, they're way lower or whatever. And you hear that vibe and you're like, whoa, what the hell? I was also, dude, it also surprises me. And I don't know how you guys do this or how you do it, but I got to sit in at GDC when a composer was showing us how different a song will sound by one single instrument being raised or lowered. And it was a flute, a violin, guitar, and it might have been the voice. I think that's what reminded me of this discussion, Katie Lang. But he was like, watch, this entire song will change in the way it feels by raising the flute up. And he raised it up, and I was thinking of like icy locations because it had that crystalline sound almost. And then lowered that and put the violin, and now I'm like somber ice. Where it was like, oh, this is God of War ice versus, a skiing game where it might just be sort of bright and over the top. I just think that's why I'm always so excited when you guys talk about music, because it's nice to see the shine on it. It's nice to see companies like yours, but also the Capcoms or whatever, who take a chance and go, you know what? Just because I remember you were saying, you really hadn't worked on stuff, be able to go in there and just be like, okay, I'm going to try all this. I'm going to put it all together. And it's awesome to see, man. It's one of the things that I feel like games for the longest time didn't get a ton of shine, like the audio side.
I think that all makes total sense. The one thing I know, so we should also acknowledge, aside from the composers, audio directors play a huge role within the games industry, and they're the ones who essentially are the ones typically doing the final game mixes, adjusting the balance of the music.
Interesting. Okay.
There are music designers who are involved as well, who are the ones who then take the music from composers, make it like they edit things in a way to make it even enhance the interactivity more, and they will be the ones who actually do that intensity and pacing as well of the music. So It is a whole team effort. It's not
Yeah.
just the composers. It's important to call that out. I know, for example, when I was at Capcom, I would be an audio lead and audio director as well as music director on different projects. And one of the things that we pushed for and that I pushed for was this, back in the 2010 area, it was this idea of having kind of different mixed states and mixed snapshots where you could kind of like your example of like the flute up really loud in this and then changing it. And we would literally have it so that, and we could literally at the touch of a button, we could completely inverse the balance and the ratio of the music, not just the music, but the whole game. So for example, you could be playing the game and I'd be like, oh, this is kind of like I'm getting ear fatigue from hearing the same game mix all over and over. I'm like, let's just try this. Let's just completely mute everything, filter out this kind of stuff, and just have like this one sound going on.
Mm-hmm.
And just that simple technique of essentially inverting, changing these macro levels of all these different layers that are going on in the game completely changes, like it feels like a new game completely.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's something that, which has been pretty cool, seeing a lot of audio directors and music directors essentially leverage that more and more, where they're making bold decisions for game mixes at certain points in the game. Because I kind of feel like gamers really appreciate that, right? Not necessarily all the ones who want to just put on their playlist and just run and gun and, do whatever they're going to do. But the ones who actually get immersed in the soundtrack and in the audioscape, they really appreciate it when those moments almost become cinematic again, where they're presented a version of reality which has its own unique aesthetic. And it's very like, whether it's the Saving Private Ryan with tinnitus, even though there's guys shooting everywhere, but you hear the ringing, right?
Right.
Whether it's that or whether it's like a boss battle, but with like music levels completely inverse so that it's the same theme, same tempo and everything, but then you're hearing a different arrangement of it just by virtue of the different things. I feel that's a very effective technique when done well, that allows players to kind of experience the game in a different way.
Yeah, it definitely helps. I also have some questions from Discord. Johnny was saying, and we discussed this a little bit, but I think he wants to go a little bit more in depth. How do you think about choosing a key for a song? Do you tend to stick to one for, I think he's saying for the game, or maybe he's meaning the location, or do you go all over the place? How do you decide? And do you have a process to come up with hooks, distinctive melodies that stick in people's heads and are instantly associated with the game? So this sort of sounds like an Outer Worlds 2.
Yeah, that's a great question. Couple things. Depends on what kind of song it is. If it's a main theme, that's one thing, because you want it to be. Often for a main theme, there's this notion of an affect, that different keys have different emotions and feelings ascribed to them. Literally, you can take the same notes, go down a half a step, a whole step, or whatever, and there's just certain keys that sound a lot darker. Like a D flat sounds way darker, a low C sounds way darker than, say, an E minor. So if you have like a guitar and you strum like an open minor chord, an E minor chord, it sounds pretty open, cool. If you literally detune that to like a D flat and play the same chord, it would be way darker.
Way darker,
just by virtue of the key that you choose, not the inner logic of the music, but the key that you chose. Second thing is, it depends on what's going on in the world. So if it's an ambient track, do you want the music to complement or to contrast the sound in the environment? Do you want it to add tension? So for example, what we did actually on even the Outer Worlds 2, and I try to do this often, is I'll reach out, because sometimes we'll do the audio and the music at the same time. And so when I'm talking to the team, I'm like, hey guys, just so you know, can you tell me kind of like what's the fundamental frequency of the
atmosphere itself? I see.
That you guys have. And then I'd be like, and then they would send it to me, and I'd be like, oh, it's kind of in this key. Do we want to add more tension in this area? Oh yeah, cool. I'm gonna literally tune it in a key just right below it, so that's literally rubbing and causing dissonance, right?
Yeah.
In other cases, it's like, no, we want this to feel like celestial and open and like airy, and so then it's like, oh, I'm gonna take maybe the ambient key and like literally either write it in that key or in a relative fifth, or like kind of an open sounding thing so it sounds harmonious. So that's an example of, for that type of a cue, you would want to choose a key that is appropriate for it. For songs, it depends who is singing it. If it's a song with singing, A lot of it has to do with the main singer and kind of their vocal range and where their sweet spot is. Because you can write a song, but if your melody goes beyond like one octave or 1.5 octaves, you're kind of limited like where you go, and you got to find that spot. It also depends on the instrument that you kind of like. If it's like more of an acoustic guitar forward song versus a orchestra forward or a piano forward song, or whatever it is, those will lend themselves to certain keys by virtue of, is it strumming? Is it a picking? Is it like a very active thing, or is it like a simple ballad on a piano? So it just depends. In the Outer Worlds 2, I typically like to do a music schema or Bible, which is, you have like a general game design document that a director will be like, this is the Bible for the project. Everything that I want is in here. I'll do something similar for the music where I'll meet with a game director, audio director, whoever, and I'll be like, okay, let's map out this game like from beginning to end, topographically for all the areas of the world. And so we did that for the Outer Worlds 2. I was like, okay, there's the main theme from Justin's original theme from Outer Worlds 1 to my theme, which kind of built on it and added other things in Outer Worlds 2. I was like, there's a cluster of notes here that is going to be our world of the sound of the Outer Worlds 2. And then from that, for each planet, like Dorado had its own planet, I found relative keys that would fit but have their own unique kind of harmonies and scales, but they would relate to the main cluster of notes within the main theme. But so that when you went to Dorado, it had its own unique vibe. So it wasn't just, we're going to do this in this drop C key. It's going to be, we're going to use like detuned acoustic guitars, bowed, custom-made instruments, because we want this part of the world to sound unique. It's related harmonically to the other parts of the game musically, but it has its own sound. It could also be like, if we were working with an audio director, it'd be, hey, when we're in this part of the world, because the music is like full of, say, low-end frequencies, let's say there's like a low-end drone or something, as in general as a vibe, then we might talk with the audio director, be like, hey, to create space for the music to sit there, can you focus mostly on like high frequency, like crispy Foley leaves, like high frequency sounds, so that essentially they're not competing and saying the same thing twice, right? And so we would go through different areas of the game and be like, okay, this has this vibe in this area, music's going to play this role, audio ambience and sound effects are going to play this role. In this area, we're going to totally flip it upside down. And like we did this on the Outer Worlds too. I was like, no low-end frequencies in this part of the world. We want it to be icier sounding. So there's no low-end warmth at all, right? And so we'll do that where we literally map out the game. Now these are targets. They're not like
hard codes.
Hard because you got to make it feel good. But they are targets in the sense that they clearly, like, one of our pillars was like, here where you are. So you should be able to close your eyes at any point and know, like, oh, I'm on Dorado, or I'm on in this part of the world. Right?
Yeah, that's very cool. I hadn't thought about the idea of, I mean, I guess I had, but maybe it didn't. The idea of closing your eyes and being like, I know I'm on this planet or whatever, even if there's some relative familiarity. I like the idea of being able to do that. We do have a bunch of other questions. The other one was, do you work in your own studio versus the games studio? So I have my fake background with like keyboards and shit. Yep. Do you go to theirs and like there's a setup there and that's where you do your stuff, or you take your stuff from home, and how do you work?
Yeah.
How do you work?
So it depends. I have a home studio. So this is in my basement. I have my own studio here. If we go record orchestra or choir, we'll go on to studios around the world and record those. Often because post-COVID, we would often, like, we've been working remote for the last 8 years. So we would work with musicians around the world in their studios, and they would send stuff and they would produce it here. We do go on site though and work with developers sometimes. It just depends on like at what stage and what is really important to do. Usually it's at the initial concept phase, or maybe at the end of a game when we're doing a final mix for a game. It's really important. Or we'll have a couple like, hey, every 6 months, let's do an in-person like intensive for a couple of days.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if we're transitioning to like on Horizon, we met with the narrative team initially so they could share the story and then talk about where we needed to go emotionally in terms of an arc of the music that we were going to write. And then as we were heading into like scoring cinematics, we met again a year later or whenever it was to literally go through like individual like scenes and making sure we're like spotting and going through really important points so that we know that. So it depends, but most composers are working in their own studios, and then they will meet either virtually or in person at a certain cadence that works for the dev team.
Super smart. The other one was, they want to know, do you have an opener or do you have a main menu that isn't your own, that is one of your favorites, either a main menu from a video game or a TV show where you just like the opener? And what they mean by the opener, I'm assuming, is like Netflix, you know, you turn on a show and it's got your Justified or whatever's got your certain song. Is there anything that captures you?
What's his name? What was that show? That's White Lotus.
White Lotus, yeah.
I probably, actually, all the music for that whole show is amazing. I think his name is Cristobal, or that's his last name. That's one that I really enjoy. I did really enjoy, I think the Skyrim menu track was pretty powerful, probably just because it was visceral, and it kind of set the stage for the game. Other than that, there's nothing that's really sticking out. What about you? You got any?
I mean, I would say I listened to the Mass Effect's main menu music for probably an hour before starting the game. I don't know what it was. I'd been looking forward to the game. I was probably a little bit shy about playing it because I would have, worried it was going to be bad or, whatever. But I remember I had no money. I had a single bar stool in my house. That was all I could sit on, or it was the floor. And I had a TV, and I got that game and I turned it on, and it was that vibe. I think that's Jack Wall and another composer, because I think there were two on that. And I just remember being stunned. And then probably, up there is Far Cry 5. I'm not a big fan of that style of music, which is, I get, bluegrass isn't right, but it's got that Kentucky Southern weird
Appalachian.
Thank you. Jeez, you just nailed it. I like Justified, the TV show, which had that music. And when I heard Far Cry 5, I was just like, I hate this music normally. Like, it's just not for me. And yet, oh, dude, did it work? Like, ridiculous, to the point of just sitting in the menu. And that's a more vibe-ish song in the main menu. Main menu music, I had a friend, he's passed away recently, unfortunately, but he reviewed for a small amount of time main menu music. He just did YouTube videos where he was like, screw it. I'm not reviewing the game. How does it reflect like, he would have loved to review The Outer Worlds too, because you were talking about how it tells sort of a story. That's the kind of stuff he would pick out, as he'd be like, now that I've played it, here are like my initial thoughts. And then I played it, and now I sort of get why they chose this. For example, Dragon's Dogma, where it starts out very orchestral and goes into a hard rock song. And it's still one of the, whenever we mention main menus, all my friends are like, I don't know why they did that, but it's one of the coolest moments I've ever experienced in a game because it was such a surprise. So yeah, those are cool.
It's so funny you mentioned that, because for developers, main menu music is literally the bane of our existence sometimes, because
it matters but doesn't. Like,
no, it matters so much, but you have to think of it. If people are developing this game for 5 years, they literally hear it over and over and over and over again. We used to have to cycle, when I was at Capcom, main menu tracks all the time, and only in the last month bring in the actual final one because the dev team would get so annoyed. You have to think about it. They're literally waiting for like builds to build while they're on their current build, and literally that's the thing that they're waiting while they're trying to like change their debug settings or whatever. So there's that. The other thing is it also is like this. I remember there was one, I think it was Dead Rising 4 or one of them, where I was just like, talk about leveraging interactivity. I was like, oh, why don't I take the main da 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 da, or whatever the main notes were for the main theme. I was like, why don't I just dice up these piano notes, put it on random on the controller, and then have it so that as the player scrolls through the main menu, it changes, and they can make their own melody, but it's using the notes from the main theme and stuff in it. I was like, that's where, to me, where like main menus are like main menu tracks, if you just sit there and listen is one thing, but main menus where there's like nested menus and you're actually involved doing stuff,
Yeah.
that's another thing which is interesting. I was just thinking also another one recently, an opening track is that series Landman.
One of my favorite
seen-
series. Yeah, I've seen every
Yeah.
single episode. Yep, Billy Bob.
And the music I found is so poignant because it kind of frames it's got warmth to it. Like
Yeah.
the whole Landman show has, like, if you look at the color palette, it's a very warm palette, even though it's kind of bleak. Like the context is typically bleak, but
it's
got
also
this
showing the
to it.
beauty and warmth of everything. Yeah, for sure.
Totally. And I found that was quite a effective and emotionally engaging kind of opening track and stuff to it. Yeah. But anyways, that's a great question.
Interesting you mention it, because one of my other favorite TV show ones is Goliath, which is also Billy Bob. And they have this starting, and I just won't skip them. My wife will be like, dude, that's 30 minutes of my life. And I'll be like, well, it's 30 minutes to listen to good music, because, yeah, Landman's is very, it's also a bit haunting, but that mimics the landscape, because they love to show, they'll show them driving. There's the long stretches of highway, because there's a lot of talking in cars in that show, which... and it's him driving, apparently, because it doesn't look blue screen like you see in a lot of, which is big help for realism and stuff like that. But yeah, that one is awesome. I'm glad somebody else has seen that show. Then let's see. Oh, so Dead Rising, horror game, sorta.
Yeah.
Comedy horror.
Sure.
Harkens definitely to sort of Friday the 13th at times, but also, Dawn of the Dead, but then a bunch of jokey, goofy stuff with all the interactivities. Do you find yourself, if you do play those games or if you do watch those shows, because I know you've said you're not necessarily the biggest game player in the world, do you find when it comes to that, is that something that you actually, do you like the comedy horror? Do you like the more actual real, and especially when it comes to musically, because I know you played around a lot in Dead Rising.
Yeah.
So was that to get away and you're not into the horror vibe as much and you sort of need that comical? Because some people feel very dire when they play a horror game. I do. I don't feel like scared as much as I'm like, this is a bit depressing. So Dead Rising, this is why you and I talked, because Dead Rising was like not that. It was distinctly not that.
Yeah, although for me as a developer at the time, I remember on Dead Rising 3, I wrote the intro song, Please Remember My Name. And I kind of, it was pretty dark, but also I wrote it as a requiem for the dead, which was kind of cool in the sense that, like, it's weird because, so you play the game and you're like, oh, this is a hack and slash with mall music, basically, right? But for us developers, when we're working on this for years, there's whole chunks of the game that are actually quite dark and quite, like, I saw it as like, I got to take this lens and like kind of point it inwards on like my inner life that was darker. And so to answer your question, I think it depends on the context. There was definitely a reason why after a decade of Dead Rising, I was attracted to Horizon.
Yeah.
or even stuff like the Outer Worlds 2, which is fun because it's not super dire and dark. I did learn the value of, like, I have a pretty sensitive nervous system and stuff. Even the reason I don't game much is because literally my boys laugh at me. They're like, I can't handle how intense
Anxiety.
I get. Like it's just too visceral for me. And so I literally watch other people play, and then I tune based on how I see them responding. And it would be the same for horror for me. I think watching pure horror. Of course, I grew up, at sleepovers watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the whole. I think one of the movies my dad first took me to was The Exorcist when I was young or something.
That's a step up.
Yeah, even now I'm like, I don't think that was the best.
Yeah,
Dad,
father, what are you doing?
Yeah, but on the other hand, it did make even Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. Great film, very dark kind of content, but I don't mind like really dark things if they point to an inner reality for me which I need to face, so my own mortality or whatever it is. So even if I'm developing Dead Rising, there was a reason I wrote "Please Remember My Name" as a Requiem, because I was like, okay, I could just treat this as like a surface level hack and slash
Right.
horror game. But I'm like, I'm stuck in this for a couple of years. I should really lean into this, and like, how dark can we go? How brutal are these feelings? What does it mean to be a human? Like, what is like we can easily hack and slash people and rip off their limbs and stuff, but like, what does real pain actually feel like? And so for me personally, have like, if I'm in a position where I have to, because of my work, deal with those unpleasant things, I've tried to lean into them hard and to go
Makes
deep
sense.
rather than just kind of stay on a surface level. Because I'm like, it doesn't, to people who love horror, it doesn't really serve them, because I'm not
Right.
really taking this seriously. And to the people who don't like horror, but are looking for almost like a companion during the horror scenes to kind of like help bridge that gap, I feel like I can do my part in helping put them at ease a little bit. I mean, not totally, because a horror, it's by function has to like, it has to, it's like on the edge of your seat entertainment,
Yeah.
right? Um, and on the flip side, on the comedy side, I'm like, if we're going to do comedy, let's go hard. So let's make sure there's darkness accompanying it, so that when we hit the comedy, it lands pretty hard. But if we're going to do comedy, let's just go all out. Let's not just do like lame ass comedy. Let's like hit it hard and hit it, go
Not
deep on
do
the
the
comedy.
dad jokes of music.
Yeah.
It is funny because like when I think of horror, even though I've watched those, my mom was the same way. She bought me, of all things, Hellraiser for Christmas, and I still don't understand it years later. But I'm a big John Carpenter fan. I'm a massive John.
Did you know that I was in talks with John Carpenter? I actually talked with him. He's a super, super awesome. Like, he's probably the most straightforward guy you could talk to. We were actually exploring getting him to be involved on the Dead Rising stuff at one point.
Oh man, that would have been amazing.
Yeah, but it was really interesting just talking to him and kind of getting a sense of like, um, he's a big gamer. He's very passionate about games and stuff. But again, we almost have this mythology about what it's like for the master of horror movies or all this kind of stuff. It's a very straightforward guy, and he kind of sits in his pocket and knows exactly what his pocket is. Even the music that he did for like, his sound is like,
It's his
works
sound.
because it's his sound. Like, it works because it's simple. It's not overdoing it, but it's very like aligned with what he thought was.
He is
strong.
very straightforward. He was the first guest I ever asked to come on because I knew he was a gamer, and his exact words were, "No thanks." And I was like, no lie. I was like, hey, it could have been an assistant. I don't think it was, because I've heard him talk about games. I've heard him talk about stuff. He is very straightforward at all times. He has his own thoughts on things, and he doesn't really sugarcoat anything. So his response, I read in his voice. He just goes, no thanks. I was like, that was probably him. It was very cool. Very cool. Next up, let's see. We talked about that. Okay. So I was not aware of Borderlands 4. What did you do for that?
So not music, that one, that was some of our audio team that worked doing sound design and implementation on that title. So we had worked with Gearbox and different stuff, and that was one of the titles. Yep.
Yeah. So looking at your thing, 50, you had said, it says on the webpage over 50, like AAA titles, everything. Puzzle Fighter.
Yeah, that was a Capcom one. That I worked
amazing.
on. Yeah,
because I was not expecting to see that on the page. I was like, wait, what?
That's awesome. I think that was my last game at Capcom before I left.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I had worked on. Yeah, we did all the music. That was a really fun soundtrack to work on.
By the way, it fits you. That makes sense of why you would think that was fun. Because when I saw it, I was like, damn, that makes total sense. I just love the idea of you doing that. That's so cool.
Yeah, and it was one of those like cool titles that I wish it would have lasted longer, just because there were so many IPs. I had not worked at Capcom on all the IPs, but it was like awesome. We got this chance. I get to work on like 20 or 30 different IPs with different artists and remixers and other stuff, and and that format, like that kind of the format itself for Puzzle Fighter was like I don't know, you just get through stuff quickly, but you get to like get a taste of all these different songs and themes and elements and stuff. It was very fun.
Yeah, there's something about it where, I mean, I know they were big at the time. I don't know if the puzzle fighter style games are big anymore or as big, but there's always something very fun about them. And I can see those just being enjoyable to work on. And they're
Yep.
also not super long. So it seems like, those games they're not like your 55 minutes of exploring an Outer Worlds kind of thing. So it
Yep.
seems like that would be quite fun to work on. And then
Yeah.
can you explain? You've explained this to me before, but I do. We have a bunch of new listeners. They wanted to know about the reskinned Mass Effect trailer job interview. So that's come up. This has come up, by the way, probably the most out of anything because I think you
Really?
told, yeah. So I think it's a combination of no one knew. I mean, obviously that makes sense, but I don't think a lot of us knew that would be an idea that somebody would be like, hey, here's what I did for this thing that's already known. It was sort of a surprise to hear the first time. And then also I think it's because it's Mass Effect. And a lot of people just love the idea of taking over and trying to mix your own idea. So anyway, I don't want to spoil the story, but can you explain how that came about and what you did?
So, I mean, in large part, I guess similar to you, Mass Effect playing a pivotal role. It in kind of a circuitous way played a pivotal role in me getting into the games industry 20 years ago. Actually, a bit over 20 years ago. At that time, I was in Montreal. I was working in the linear world, film and TV. I was still kind of writing for Hollywood stuff. But again, no games experience. I had a friend who was working at EA from high school. We played on the volleyball team together. And he said, hey, we have a new studio. It's a startup. It's a bunch of ex-EA guys who used to be in, I think, EA. It was like a baseball game that they had. And we're starting up a new studio called Blue Castle Games. We don't have an audio person at all. And I know you are in audio. He didn't really know even much about my music as well, but he's just like, hey. And it just happened to coincide that at the time I was commissioned by the Vancouver Symphony to write something for the Olympics that they were hosting. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to be there. And he's like, great, let's try to line up an interview with you and the president of Blue Castle Games. So, and then he's like, can you send over a resume and something? And I was like, sure, whatever. And I had a bunch of film stuff, no game experience, nothing. I mean, I played Super Mario growing up and ColecoVision and all that kind of stuff, but no, really, I wasn't a hardcore gamer at all. And long and short of it, it was basically, the president knew about my work in the more serious music as a kind of classical and sacred kind of composer in terms of like orchestras and choirs and stuff like that. So he knew I had that background, but he didn't, he's like, do you have any demo stuff for music or audio? Mm-hmm. Music was kind of secondary actually at the time because they were looking for an audio lead. And I was like, no, but let me put something together. So long and short of it is, I don't even know how I got to Mass Effect. It could have been just circumstantial that I was just typed in like whatever the latest, greatest game was. And there was like an announced trailer, I think, for Mass Effect. And I don't even know which one it was. That would have been, we moved in 2006. So that would have been like 2005. Mm-hmm. Would that be?
Yeah, it would have been announced. It would have been one. Yeah, I believe that would have been one.
Long story short, I literally just downloaded, at that time, I don't even know if it was YouTube or what it was, but I downloaded the trailer or captured it, whatever, muted all the audio, and I reskinned the whole trailer. I did all the sound effects and did the music for it. And it was funny because it was like this weird, it was almost like musical sound design. At that point, I had not, I had done audio and music for film and TV, but not really games in terms of like the interactivity and all that kind of stuff. Anyways, long story short, it was very much like a guttural, visceral kind of, I just like wrote stuff, sound designed it, music designed it in a way where it was like scoring with sound design. I don't know how to explain it. It was like it was like this mix between music and sound design. And it just, anyways, long story short, I did it. I didn't know if this was on point or if they liked it or didn't like it, but eventually it secured me the interview, and they loved what I did enough to then go to do an in-person interview. And that interview, in which I actually said, I'm not a gamer, I actually don't care much about games, but they asked me some really hard questions about like, what would you do in this case? And they kind of presented like real world, like development questions.
Sure.
And then I was like, that sounds freaking amazing. Like, and it was in that interview that I shouldn't have got the job. I had no experience in games, and I did the Mass Effects reskin. And then that interview was kind of this culmination of that, where I was like, that was the point where I realized the questions they were asking as developers of games, I was just like, the light bulb went off. I was like, this is like an industry that's like going somewhere.
Right.
I can see myself going really deep, and like the opportunities to be creative and explore stuff just during that interview and during that Mass Effect reskin. I was like, I got to pursue this. And it was more of like it's kind of light bulb meets door opens up. And yeah, I got the job, even though I said I'm not much of a gamer and I actually don't like games that much at that point. The door opened, and then I spent the next 5 years not doing music,
doing
audio and stuff. But it really kind of, those 5 years I learned to love the industry, the people, the process, and learning how things were built from the ground up. It became almost like I did like a master's in kind of game development, basically the equivalent of it, because it was like, it forced me to like I was doing crazy, like I was doing 100-hour work weeks at that time, just to like, again, you have to imagine going from nothing, knowing nothing about it, to like having to ship these games with complex systems and speech systems and music and audio and stuff. So for me, that was kind of like a, fly by the seat of your pants, and then essentially realize this is pretty awesome. Like, and then later the door opens 5 years later when Capcom comes and I write music for the theme suite and stuff.
I feel like working on that audio probably also was highly informative, that maybe not that all composers don't get that, but it does feel like maybe you working on the audio side then informs later on, like the composer side, the role, the difficulties somebody may have. It's one of the reasons why whenever you hear somebody outside of a job getting hired into a higher position, sometimes people are a little questioning, because they're like, well, do they know what's going on? Did they come from the ground up so that they know Bill's problems over here in financial, and do they know Susan's problems over here? You got 5 years of understanding all the problems that people that you get to work with have, which I think is important.
It made a huge difference. Not only, even to this day, when I go to like game conferences or other stuff, and I'm talking to people, and they're like, "Hold on, you know what?" And like I literally am in conversations with audio directors and other people where I know more than they do sometimes. Not always, like obviously we learn, but it was just that degree of being them to know like they have a peer who understands their pain, who understands like the minutia of the problems that they face, has kept me in good stead, because it's allowed me to be an ally and a collaborator with them, rather than them seeing as like, oh great, we have the artiste, the composer who's and they know that I care, that like I know what it's like to be in their shoes, and you're an audio lead or director, and you have to ship, and you feel like literally the world is crumbling underneath you because the game mix is falling apart, the build is broken, you're the last person to touch the build before it goes to gold master, everything is hanging on you, and it's all bunched up at the end. So it makes a big difference, at least I have found, to understand kind of where they're coming from, and also to be able to know when to shut up and when to add value to conversations, right?
Yeah, because I mean, I assume also there's times where everybody, I mean, we hear this from a lot of developers that resources aren't finite. Maybe back in the day there might have been, or infinite, sorry, maybe back in the day they were, but now certainly with games, we're starting to see a lot of, I mean, I think the leak for Sony was that they had asked Insomniac to cut $80 million from Spider-Man 2, which is their premier game. So you're like, okay, financials are definitely inverting right now, where they're, and so the idea of being cooperative, but understanding that you might have competitive needs. I need this, they need that. But if you can say, I know exactly where you're coming from, you do need that, let me explain where I'm coming from. Also the language, even though you're both audio in a way, voice acting. When I was talking to David Bateson, Hitman voice lead. We were just talking at times about how, like, you know, you want to ask for something, but you don't even know the language sometimes to ask.
Yep.
So if you do know the language, it's a little easier to, because then it's not as competitive. It's like the person, oh, you know, we don't have to sit here and worry about our lexicon and our language for the next 5 hours. Make sure we're talking about the same thing. We can sort of talk.
Yeah, and
jive.
it also depends. It also depends if you're managing upwards or downwards, right? Like if you're managing upwards to C-suite people or investors or publishers or whoever is at that level, or lawyers, for example, there was a lot of times where, like, just knowing the fact that having an executive team know that, oh, don't worry, you have tons of experience with legalese, I'll flag anything. That amount of weight that they can just relax, because, you know, this is not your first time doing it, and you know what to look out for. That's going to keep them protected. Is a huge deal, because that sometimes literally those concerns are more important than the this one feature in the game that's really important. Maybe important to the gamers, but it could be the difference between keeping the lights on at the studio and not keeping the lights on at the studio, right? And then vice versa, managing downwards to people who are QA testers, you know, junior missions designers, people who are, like, literally in the thick of, like, they know the heartbeat of the game as the first consumers or who are going to experience it. You know, making sure that you have an open channel of communication with them and that you're actually listening to what they're saying is very important, because they are the ones who are going to make or break whether or not the reviewers kill you, whether or not the first fans who are in the open betas are going to kill you, right? Like, you got to listen to those people and understand when to lean into that, and then when to also come in with your expertise and be like, yes, that'd be great. We don't have budget for this. The highest priority thing is this. The thing that's going to add the most value to all parties is this. And that's kind of, you need to triangulate between both upwards and downwards and kind of find that sweet spot where you're hitting the things that are most important while staying on budget, but adding a lot of interesting new features while not killing all the resources that you're trying to leverage, you know?
Yeah, it's always cool to see anybody who's come in with a couple other roles. Anybody I've talked to who's a developer who's done a couple other things. It always seems like their life's a tiny bit easier, you know, because the shared language and the ability of understanding where somebody else is. It's always super helpful.
You also don't, there's a certain level of calm that you can, or like, there's a certain, you don't panic at the things that you used to panic about when you first started, right? And just that level of not panicking or reacting can be really helpful for a team that's in the middle of, like, maybe they worked for 3 months and their whole area of the game that they built has been canceled and their morale is low. They don't know if they should believe in the product anymore, that they're building, you know. So sometimes it's just experiencing those lows so that then you can be like, and experiencing the highs, and then to come back 10 years later and be like, hey guys, no, what you got here fundamentally is really good. Yes, this kind of veered off track, and yeah, it sucks that we can't ship that, but this is still a really good product, and here's why. If you can articulate that and really be a great partner with them that understands basically the things that matter the most when their time is precious, when your time is precious, and that makes a huge difference, because then you know that if you're putting an effort to something, you're not wasting it on something that's going to be thrown away or disregarded or not important, you know?
Yeah, it's very important. As we wrap it up, can you talk about what you're, I don't want to get anybody in trouble. Can you talk about what you're working on, or if not?
I mean, we're working on tons of different projects, to be honest with you, from big AAA stuff to some cool, I wouldn't say indie stuff, but kind of like smaller.
Double A, sort of, maybe.
Yeah, double A. It's funny. There's a weird world now between kind of with budgets shifting, you know, to more, they call it triple I now.
Yeah.
Triple I, double A, whatever, and anywhere in between.
Dude, it's so confusing. Or indie, which means nothing now. Indie can just, dude, I don't like when I review, I won't even worry about, I'll be like, it's $60. That's $60. We can all agree on $60, but we're probably not going to agree on how this is coming to, like, what the term is anymore. It's like the genres for music when it used to be, it's like hard rock, rock and roll, classic rock. Now it's like death metal, German, stomp rock, slappy hap. And you're like, what does that even mean? So.
Yeah. So, I mean, the industry is atomized at one level, but then, like you said, at the end of the day, people are like, is it a $20 or $60 or $40 game, right? Like, what I can tell you is we are working on some pretty awesome games with different partners. We just brought on a director of co-development or external development at Interleave. And so we're actually, a lot of our partners are, yes, we do music, yes, we do audio, we do tech. But a lot of them have asked us over the years to do help with, narrative design, UI, UX, other things. And so we brought on a director of external development, and we're going to start, working and developing more so that eventually we're going to be creating our own games.
Very cool.
And kind of within our wheelhouse, obviously. And we are developing our own tech IP as well, which we'll be sharing later, at least the first bit next year. Right now, we're just focusing most of that with our partners that we currently work with. But a lot of really cool things. I think what we've realized is that we're still super committed to the industry, and we want to. There's on one hand, it's very mercurial out there right now in terms of the landscape, but also the opportunity is huge in terms of like people still love games. There's tons of opportunities for things to happen. So we're trying to focus more on cool opportunities, strategic partnerships, like trying to like just really level up the kind of projects that we're touching and working on, and to really add a lot of I don't want to use the word value. That is kind of what I'm talking about, but it's more about like, we just want to work on cool things with cool people. And that means sometimes doing things that are adjacent to music or audio, right? Because sometimes that's the kind of like, for me, the Mass Effect and working on audio was the door to get into do music. It's the same thing for us. We don't know where things land. We're developing our own tech IP for the games industry, which is great, and it's going really well. That could be a door opening for other things.
Right.
Making our own games also is a cool thing, because then it allows us to, really focus on that which we are passionate about, the music, the audio, the tech. But we will continue to be a great partner to the AAA studios and the AA's and the triple I's as well. It's really just, if you're cool, if you're working on a cool project and you're looking for a really, motivated and aspirational partner to collaborate with, that's the kind of conversations we love chasing, right?
Well, Oleksa, it has been a pleasure. Don't leave. I'm just going to wrap this up and then I'll stop us.
Sure.
I appreciate it. Everybody can go to interleave.com and you can check out that is interleave.com, right? Not
interleavecreative.com. It's funny, we couldn't get the interleave.com because it was taken at the time, but
everything we want is taken. I felt the same way.
Yeah.
Go ahead and check out his stuff. Also, Dead Rising, Horizon, Puzzle Fighter. You can go and you can listen to his stuff. I wish that Mass Effect trailer was out there somewhere. That's, now that I think about it, too. Yeah,
now
sometimes
you got me thinking. I got to go look for it.
Yeah, you need to find your own hard drive. It's been a pleasure as always. Especially, I want to thank you for being the first new interview as we start the interview series and start talking to composers, start talking to people about games. And is there anything you want to shout out before we end?
I mean, the latest soundtrack was for The Outer Worlds 2, so big shout out to Obsidian and Microsoft on that one, and my whole team at Interleave. They're awesome. Couldn't do it without them, and obviously my wife and my kids couldn't do it without them. But other than that, I love hearing from people, so please reach out. I'm always open, happy to chat through stuff, and like we talked earlier, if we can do something to encourage each other, then I'm all for it.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate everybody sitting by. If you get a chance, if you can like and comment, I would appreciate it. Peace out, everybody.
Cheers.